All right, let's read the next chapter of The Borrowers. It's been a little bit of time, and so some of you may need to remember that the story itself is being told by a woman named Mrs. May. And this is the story her brother told her about borrowers. We don't really know much about them, but we do know that the three that we know of are Pod, Homily, and Arrietty. Pod's the father, Homily's the mother, Arrietty's their daughter. They live under the kitchen, under the floor, in a very big house. The brother of Mrs. May was sick and had to go live in this house. And so he's in the house. We see that the borrowers use all kinds of things from the house that are really big-sized things, but they use them as things in their own homes. So they might use a thimble that you put on your finger as something that you drink out of. So they are very tiny. All right. And Arrietty was very concerned, Homily was concerned that Pod wasn't home yet from borrowing because usually he wouldn't be gone this long. So she's kind of concerned something happened, but she heard him start to come. Pod came in slowly, his sack on his back. He leaned his hat pin with its dangling name tape against the wall, and on the middle of the kitchen table he placed a doll's teacup. It was the size of a mixing bowl. "Why, Pod," began Homily. "Got the saucer, too," he said. He swung down the sack and untied the neck. "Here you are," he said, drawing out the saucer. "Matches it." He had a round, currant bunny sort of face. Tonight it looked flabby. "Oh, Pod," said Homily, "you do look strange. Are you all right?" Pod sat down. Fair enough," he said. "You went up the curtain," said Homily. "Oh, Pod, you shouldn't have. It's shaking you." Pod made a strange face. His eyes swiveled around towards Arrietty. Homily stared at him, her mouth open, and then she turned. "Come along, Arrietty," she said briskly. "You pop off to bed now, like a good girl, and I'll bring you some supper." "Oh," said Arrietty, "can't I see the rest of the borrowings?" "Oh, your father's got nothing now. Only food. Off you pop to bed. You seen the cup and saucer." Arrietty went into the sitting room to put away her diary and took some time fixing her candle on the upturned drawing pin which served as a holder. "Whatever are you doing?" grumbled Homily. "Give it here. There, that's the way. Now, off to bed and fold your clothes, mind." "Good night, Papa," said Arrietty, kissing his flat white cheek. "Careful of the light," he said mechanically, and watched her with his round eyes until she had closed the door. Now, did you notice that Arrietty wants to listen in, and while she was getting her things together, she was kind of doing it really, really slowly. I bet you've done that before. "Now, Pod," said Homily, when they were alone, "tell me, what's the matter?" Pod looked at her blankly. "I've been seen," he said. Homily put out a groping hand for the edge of the table. She grasped it and lowered herself slowly onto the stool. "Oh, Pod," she said. There was silence between them. Pod stared at Homily, and Homily stared at the table. After a while, she raised her white face. "Badly?" she asked. Pod moved restlessly. "I don't know about badly. I've been seen. Ain't that bad enough?" "No one," said Homily slowly, "hasn't never been seen since Uncle Hendreary, and he was the first, they say, for 45 years. A thought struck her, and she gripped the table. "It's no good, Pod. I won't emigrate."
"No one's asked you to," said Pod.
"To go and live like Hendreary and Lupe in the Badger's set. The other side of the world, that's where they say it is, all among the earthworms."
"It's 2 fields away, above the Spiny," said Pod.
"Nuts! Oh, that's what they eat. Oh, and berries. Oh, I wouldn't wonder if they don't eat mice."
"You've eaten mice yourself," Pod reminded her.
"All drafts and fresh air, and the children going up wild. Oh, I think of Arrietty," said Homily. "Think the way she's been brought up. An only child. She'd catch her death. Oh, it's different for Hendreary."
"Why?" asked Pod. He's got 4.
Well, that's why, explained Homily. When you got 4, they're brought up rough. But never mind that now. Who saw you?
A boy, said Pod.
A what?
Exclaimed Homily, staring. A boy. Pod sketched out a rough shape in the air with his hands. You know, a boy.
But there isn't. I mean, what sort of boy?
I don't know what you mean, what sort of boy. A boy in a nightshirt. A boy. You know what a boy is, don't you?
Yes, said Homily. I know what a boy is, but there hasn't been a boy, not in this house, these 20 years.
Well, said Pod, there's one here now.
Homily stared at him in silence, and Pod met her eyes. Where did he see you? Asked Homily at last.
In the schoolroom.
Oh, said Homily. When you was getting the cup?
Yes, said Pod.
Well, haven't you got eyes? Asked Homily. Couldn't you looked first?
There's never nobody in the schoolroom, and what's more, he went on, there wasn't today.
Then where was he?
In bed, in the night nursery, or whatever it's called. That's where he was, sitting up in bed, with the doors open.
Well, you could have looked in the nursery.
How could I, halfway up the curtain?
Is that where you was?
Yes.
With the cup?
Yes. I couldn't get up or down.
Oh, Pod, wailed Homily. I should never have let you go. Oh, not at your age.
Now, look here, said Pod. Don't mistake me. I got up all right. Got up like a bird, as you might say. Bobbles or no bobbles. But, he leaned towards her, after, with the cup in my hand, if you see what I mean. He picked it up off the table. You see, it's heavy like. You can hold it by the handle like this, but it droops and drops, and as you might say, you should take a cup like this in your 2 hands. A bit of cheese off a shelf or an apple. Well, I drop that, give it a push, and it falls, and I climbs down on me own time and picks it up. But with a cup, you see what I mean? And coming down, you gotta watch your feet. And as I say, some of the bobbles was missing. You don't know what you could hold on to, not safely.
Oh, Pod, said Homily, her eyes full of tears. What did you do?
Well, said Pod, sitting back again. I'm sorry, what did you... Oh, he took the cup.
Well, what do you mean?
Exclaimed Homily aghast. Pod avoided her eyes. Well, he'd been sitting up in bed there watching me. I'd been on that curtain a good 10 minutes, 'cause the hall clock had just struck the quarter.
But how do you mean he took the cup?
Well, he got out of bed there, and he was standing looking up. I'll take the cup, he said.
Oh, gasped Homily, her eyes staring. And you gave it him?
Well, he took it, said Pod, ever so gentle, and then when I was down, he give it me.
Homily put her face in her hands.
Now, don't take on, said Pod uneasily.
He might have caught you,
shuddered Homily in a stifled voice. Yes, said Pod, but he just gimme the cup. Here you are, he said.
Homily raised her face. Oh, what are we gonna do? She asked.
Pod sighed. Well, there isn't nothing we can do, except...
Oh, no! Exclaimed Homily. Not that! Not emigrate! Oh, not that, Pod! Now I've got the house so nice, and a clock and all.
Oh, we could take the clock, said Pod.
Oh, and Arrietty. Oh, what about her? She's not like those cousins. She can read, Pod, and sew a treat.
He don't know where we live, said Pod.
Oh, but they look, exclaimed Homily. Remember Hendreary? They got the cat and...
Now, said Pod, don't bring up the past.
Oh, but you gotta think of it. They got the cat and...
Yes, said Pod, but Eglatina was different.
How different? She was Arrietty's age.
Well, they hadn't told her, you see. That's where they went wrong. They tried to make her believe that there wasn't nothing but was under the floor. They never told her about Mrs. Driver or cramphorol. Least of all about cats.
There wasn't any cat, Homily pointed out. Not till Hendreary was seen.
Well, there was then, said Pod. You gotta tell 'em, that's what I say, or they try to find out for themselves.
Pod, said Homily solemnly, we haven't told Arrietty.
Oh, she knows, said Pod. He moved uncomfortably. She's got her grading.
Well, she doesn't know about Eglatina. She doesn't know about being seen.
Well, said Pod, we'll tell her. We always said we would. There's no hurry.
Homily stood up. Pod, she said, we're going to tell her now. And that's where the chapter ends. So Pod was seen while climbing a curtain to get to the teacup. And they mentioned the baubles on the curtain. There's some curtains that they have little kind of balls that hang down off of them, and so he was kind of using those to climb up, but some were missing. And he wasn't sure, because there were some missing, if some were loose. So he had to really take his time, plus he had a cup that was as big as a mixing bowl in one hand. So the boy kind of helped them down, and we'll have to see if that's going to cause trouble for them or not. The boy in this, remember, is Mrs. May's brother, who told her the whole story. All right, we'll see you tomorrow.